This program is part of Veterans Coming Home, a public media initiative to support veterans made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney, president of LPB.
And I'm Bob Mann, professor at LSU's Manship School of Mass Communication. This month is National Military Appreciation Month, and in Louisiana we have a strong tradition of military service and support. From the enlisted soldiers at bases like Fort Polk and Barksdale to citizen soldiers in Louisiana's National Guard, Louisianians have always stepped forward to secure the defense of our country and the well-being of its people. And due to our appreciation, over 350,000 veterans are happy to call Louisiana home.
Well, Bob, you know, since 9/11, 2.6 million servicemen and women have been deployed overseas. Yet today's soldiers make up less than 0.5% of the U.S. population. This often creates a military-civilian divide for returning veterans, even in a military-friendly state like Louisiana. Over the next hour, we'll hear from veterans and civilians about how best to bridge that gap, as well as the challenges and opportunities for soldiers transitioning back to civilian life on Louisiana Veterans Coming Home. Louisiana National Guard veteran Christopher Zahn won't head to the mall without his 93-pound security blanket.
I don't really want to associate with people, but when she's there, I'm just bright. I'm ready to go. I want to talk about stuff.
Lily, Zahn's 6-year-old American bulldog, helps him cope with crowds, a challenge due to post-traumatic stress disorder from his time in Iraq.
She also helps me associate, more with people. Like, it's kind of a good talking point. People just come up like, oh, it's a service dog. Ooh, can I pet her? And it just helps me integrate myself back into society more.
Dr. Dana Pollard is a clinical psychologist and sees patients like Zahn at the Alexandria VA Medical Center. Her team was established specifically to deal with soldiers transitioning back from operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. As conflicts grew, so did her program.
Our clinic now consists of a primary care team, a physician, nurses. We have occupational therapy, 3 providers of mental health, myself, another clinical psychologist and social worker, of course, case management.
Prompted by veterans telling her that she couldn't understand what they'd been through, Pollard joined the National Guard. It's helped her better relate to her patients, 80% of whom are Army National Guard.
For a lot of veterans, it helps me to get my foot in the door for them to know that, hey, you wear the uniform, so you at least have a basic understanding of what I'm talking about.
But Pollard says a bigger barrier is getting veterans who need help to ask for it. A 2014 Veterans Administration report indicates that suicide rates have increased 60% among male veterans who did not use VA services.
We're constantly trying to break through what they've been taught since they joined the military, which is be tough, be strong, do it on your own, you can do this. And they still have that mentality. And coming here to get help is very counter to that mentality.
Your soldier is taught to not show weakness, to kind of drink water, walk it off. That dealing with your inner turmoil is not a weakness.
Jonathan Soldo received a Purple Heart for his actions following a truck explosion in Iraq. Shrapnel was removed from his head, but his emotional scars took longer to heal. Soldo has joined with veteran Ryland Choate to form the Lafayette-based group Veteran Peer Support. The goal, Choate says, is to speed up the recovery process by establishing a support network for soldiers before they need it.
You could actually introduce yourself to troops before they leave, and then you know each other by name. Maybe you send care packages while they're deployed. You keep that relationship. Once again, it's all time and what you invest into it. And then whenever they return, you're right there with them.
A 2014 study identifying the needs of Louisiana's transitioning veterans found that the most frequently reported problems post-deployment are medical and psychological. 1/4 of veterans had problems with reemployment, yet 42% of veterans did not seek reemployment help.
Sometimes we'll talk to veterans that have applied for 40 or 50 jobs and haven't heard anything back. But then we take a look at their resume, and there's certain things that are missing on there that employers might be looking for in their job fields.
Scotty LeBlanc heads the Louisiana Workforce Commission's Veterans Program. In the last quarter, the office has seen its ratings for services to disabled veterans rise from 38th to number 2 in the nation. The agency's career centers help veterans around the state translate their military skills into civilian terms, plus help them practice interviewing for a job.
You take someone like me who's spent 20 years in the Army, came in at 17, retired at 37. I had never sat on a job interview in my life up to that point.
Employers hiring veterans can receive federal tax credits ranging from $1,600 to $9,600. But LeBlanc says veterans offer something much more valuable to employers.
If they want somebody who's going to be at work on time, somebody who's used to following guidelines, someone who you can just give a little general bit of direction and they're going to find a way to get the job done no matter what, then hire a veteran.
For Louisiana veterans who prefer working for themselves, like Ken and Stella Gibson, agriculture is a viable option.
A vet doesn't have to have 40 acres or 100 acres. Literally, they can take a few pots and put some tomatoes in a pot and grow it inside their house even.
In 2014, the National Farm Bill expanded its scope beyond the traditional large farmer. Dexter Sapp provides statewide outreach for the Natural Resources Conservation Service.
There's a segment of the population, the veterans, the underserved, the smaller farmers, smaller producers with the 2 acres that we have been trying to reach because we have something for them as well. You know, whereby they may not be able to feed a nation, but they can feed a community. They can feed themselves. And Ken is a model of that.
With free guidance from USDA experts, the Gibsons are raising chickens, fruits, vegetables, and crawfish on their property in Rayville. Ken, who has limited mobility due to an injury in Iraq, is getting financial assistance for a raised bed greenhouse. Stella says the farm has been invaluable in Ken's transitioning process.
He is 80% unemployable, and this has been a really good thing for him to get back into being productive and feel useful, and he has a purpose now, and I've seen a big difference in him. When he wakes up, he has something to do.
To make the transition process easier for Louisiana's returning veterans, Zahn recommends civilians be patient and respectful. For veterans, Zahn says to remember that help is available.
You can't just jump back into your same shoes that you were in when you left. Just got to work with it and know that you have options. There's plenty of options for folks to have to help you reintegrate.
Joining us to explore the challenges and opportunities for Louisiana's returning veterans is our studio audience. It includes male and female veterans and family members. It also includes representatives from Team Red, White, and Blue, Heroes on the Water, and Wounded War Heroes. We also have individuals who assist veterans with finding employment or starting their own business. Welcome, everybody. As mentioned in the setup piece, in 2014, a needs survey of Louisiana veterans transitioning home was done for the Louisiana Armed Forces Foundation. Here's a look at some of the findings. The 4 biggest transition difficulties indicated by veterans were related to employment, 25%, mental health issues, 21%, personal finances, 12%, and physical health, 10%. The most frequently mentioned best sources of help were family, 33%, other veterans, 19%, a spouse, 12%, and friends, 8%. VA representatives were mentioned by the largest percentage of veterans, 20%, as being most helpful in providing information on veterans' resources and benefits. Ironically, VA representatives were also second most frequently mentioned as least helpful in providing information at 11%. And lack of awareness of what happens in the post-discharge enrollment period is very high, with 75% indicating they don't know. So let's start there. For the veterans, What are some of the challenges you faced in transitioning back to civilian life, and did you feel prepared? And to the civilians in our panel, our audience here, what type of assistance can you provide? I'd like to go first to James, and if you'll all give me briefly your name and the organization you're with. And James, what are some of the challenges that veterans are facing in Louisiana in particular coming back into civilian life?
Sure. My name's James Davis. I'm currently at LSU. I was a soldier. I spent about 4 years in the regular Army and then another 17 in the Army Reserve. I loved being a soldier. I loved wearing the uniform. I had 2 deployments, and I enjoyed everything about it up until my last deployment. It was a very frustrating deployment as far as I was mobilized as an individual out of the Army Reserve. So I was mobilized, I was deployed, I go on a mission, I'm in Afghanistan for a year, and then I come back from Afghanistan in August of 2013, and I'm coming back as an individual. So when you go through that process as an individual, you don't have a unit and your friends or your buddies to help you through the process just to get there and come home. So as I'm coming home as an individual, we come back through a redeployment organization, a redeployment station. And while services were offered, the only way to receive those services are to stay there longer. And you've been I was away from home for a year. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to see my family. I wanted to sleep in my own bed again. I wanted to get back to my life. The redeployment station, open bay barracks, a lot of just kind of being herded through the process. So none of it was pleasant. None of it made you want to stay there. To include, your families weren't invited, and there was really no way for your families to come be part of the process with you. So I found that very frustrating. And through I guess we'd call jet lag, I felt like I woke up one morning in Afghanistan, and I felt like the very next day, through the process of flying back through Kuwait, flying back to Fort Benning, Georgia, and then going through a very quick out processing, I felt like the next morning I'm standing in my house, and it's kind of disorienting and a little bit confusing coming back as an individual.
Does that sound familiar to anyone about that sort of that jet lag that he's talking about?
I'm Rylan Schultz, veteran peer support. Just piggybacking on what he said too, it seemed as though I deployed in 03-04 to Afghanistan, but it seemed like even if you deploy as a group, whenever you come back and you're trying to process a combat situation, you're still by yourself. It seems as though if your friends that are civilians, they'll still try to surround you and try to love on you as much as they can, but you still need a veteran present to relate to. So even though your friends try their best, you still end up being alone.
Yeah. So those of you who are involved in helping veterans transition back into civilian life, somebody want to talk about John?
I'm John Pugh with Employer Support of the Guard and Reserve. Our job is mostly to assist guardsmen and reservists of all services in their employer relations. And so we don't deal a lot with people who come off active duty after 20 or 30 years. We deal with the guardsman and reservist who had a job when he left and hopefully has a job and has no problems when he gets back. And we've been pretty successful in mediating those conflicts that arise as a result of mobilizing the reserves. As a Vietnam veteran, we didn't have that problem because you mobilized, you drafted everyone at 18 and 19 years old. Most of them didn't have jobs, and they came back and they didn't have job-related problems. But they do now. And I think some of the problems, because of mobilizing reserve units, particularly in the Guard, is they have that group of people that can support them because they generally stay in the Guard and Reserve for a period of time. As James mentioned, the problem with some of the reserves is they do mobilize individually, which is what happened in Vietnam. They mobilized everyone individually. There were no units that went, and the problems were multiplied. But I think now it's better when you mobilize hometown units and they come back because they have that support group and they have organizations, hopefully, that are, there's multiple organizations like mine that also assist veterans in employment finding, employment, resolution of conflicts, etc.
Linda, you want to talk about the work that you do supporting those families and
Blue Star Moms?
Yes,
sir. On my son's first deployment in 07, I was not a Blue Star mom, and it was devastating to know that you could not reach your child if something happened. And that's when I heard about Blue Star Moms and the support that they give to us. And it's a wonderful organization for us to be a part of, to know that there's other moms out there that know exactly how you feel. I had someone at my church tell me that her son was at school in New Orleans, in med school, and that he was in more danger than my son was in Iraq. And I thought, how could you tell me that? But that's the way she felt. But anyway, it's just like people, your best friends, everybody doesn't understand that bond that you have.
For those of our viewers who don't know what a Blue Star Mom is, tell us what that term means.
We are mothers of military children. Our children serve in the military, and once a Blue Star Mom, always a Blue Star Mom. I have moms that tell me, when my child's been out, you're still a Blue Star Mom. You still know that feeling. So, yes, sir. We're 12,000 strong across the United States. We have 5 chapters in Louisiana right now. So our Chapter 7 in City of Central is the newest chapter. And we're just a proud organization, proud of our kids.
Anybody else a civilian who's doing some work helping vets transition back in? Erin?
Well, I just wanted to speak to the idea of being part of the military family and then transitioning out, but having so much of a connection with other people who we just say that they get it through my loss. You can't necessarily re-engage with all the relationships that you had before with other military people, but that's part of the life that you had. So through TAPS and other organizations, it's nice to be able to reconnect with people who understand.
Right.
And it's so great.
Emmerich, talk about your organization and what Wounded War Heroes is doing.
We've just basically established an organization where we can get these veterans coming home into some outdoor recreational activities, just to get them outside in the great outdoors with their battle brothers, where they can talk about each other's issues and what they went through. We've all talked about it. I never served and could never tell these guys, I understand what you went through or how can I help you. But if you can get them in the great outdoors on a hunting or fishing trip that we've been able to put together, where they're together each other, it's the focal part is on them and their therapy and rehabilitation. It's amazing. We kind of found out by default that there was a outdoor recreational therapy there for these guys that money couldn't buy or something you couldn't bottle up, and it's you get them together and let them talk and intervene and go through what's been going on in their lives. It's a therapy in itself.
Josh, I saw you nodding the whole time Emmerich was talking.
I'm Josh Jardy with Heroes on the Water. I was Louisiana National Guard, deployed 04 and 05, and we came back. They out-processed us, and I moved out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I got hooked really hard. I was trying to find ways of coping with my problems, and I didn't have any resources. The VA was just coming into PTSD, and I got hooked on meth real bad, and I sent one wife off to her deployment overseas, and my current wife, she was a Navy Seabee. Whenever I got back, I was on meth real good for 5 years. I got back to Louisiana in 2011, found out about Emmerich's program, Wounded War Heroes, and they took me out on my first deer hunt and took me out rabbit hunting, squirrel hunting, and all kind of fishing trips. And that got me realizing that I don't need the other drugs in my life. I can have a new drug, new addiction that's positive. A lot of the soldiers who's coming back, they're taking the coping, they're playing like coping is a bad word. They don't understand that coping skills can help them process what happened to them. So they're coming back and they're learning that. Emmerich's program, I guess I'm a product of the system. They've motivated me. They helped me get me back on my feet to the right point where I wanted to do my part to help Louisiana veterans. So that's what Heroes on the Water does, is we take veterans out kayak fishing of any age, gender, race. It doesn't matter what they are, where they were hurt at, we take them out fishing. And that's the best way that I can think of for reintegration is you hand a veteran a kayak or a paddle or a fishing rod, give them something productive to do, get the meth pipe or whatever it is in their hands, get the gun out of their hands, get them outside, get them outdoors, get them interacting.
And Emmerich, as you said, you're not a veteran, so you got involved just because you care deeply about, it's not that you're coming out of the military, but you have a deep appreciation for the service of.
Yes, sir. I was very blessed to meet 4 young men on a fishing trip and got to hear their stories. And you think you know, or you feel like you've heard what they go through, but you don't. and to hear their stories. And beginning of the day, they barely shake your hand and don't make eye contact. At the end of the day, where you're talking about families and when we're getting together again, and you hear their stories, and it's truly amazing to know what they signed up for. They weren't drafted. They went out and signed up themselves to protect us over here, and to hear their stories, and you feel in your heart you got to do something for them. Yeah. And God's blessed me with a bunch of friendships, family members that I mentioned it and they ran with it, and here we are 7 years later. Never thought we'd get here. Never intended the therapy, but just to give a little back, and it's worked out wonderfully because of the local sponsors here in this area.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So that's all the time we have for this portion of our show. When we return, we'll be joined by a panel of experts to further explore Louisiana veterans coming home. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. Tonight we're discussing the challenges and opportunities for Louisiana's returning veterans. Joining us now is our panel of experts. Alfred Al Leger is Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Louisiana Department of Veterans Affairs. Leger oversees all the counselors and paralegals providing VA benefits support in the state of Louisiana. He served 20 years in the Navy. Captain Angela Huval is a clinical social worker who serves in the 256th Infantry Brigade Combat Team. Huval is a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Colonel David Gregg Athey is the Garrison Commander of Fort Polk Army Base, a position he has held since June of 2015. He is a veteran of Operations Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Iraqi Freedom, and New Dawn. And James C. Ho is the Employment Coordinator for Louisiana under the Department of Defense's Hero to Hired program. He has served as a combat medic and officer with the 101st Airborne Division. Before we go to our audience questions, I'd like to first ask each of you briefly, from your perspective, are the transitioning challenges that post-9/11 veterans face in some ways different from veterans before them? Mr. Leger?
I believe they're all the same. Different group of guys, but all the same feelings coming home. Having deployed myself and returned from first deployment, feel the same as the Desert Storm, OIF veterans. You get home and you're lost. You have no clue. Just like you hear time and time again. For 14 years I've been a veterans counselor, and I've heard it time and time again. It continues. The same lonely feeling that nobody understands you. Nobody knows what you're going through.
Captain, what's your perspective?
I think it depends on the soldier that you're talking to and what era. I think that the experience is an individualized experience, but I think we've come a long way. We have really focused on giving our veterans a whole lot more resources than they had in the past, and even within the last 10, 15 years, we are definitely increasing our resources, as you can tell from your audience prior to us coming on.
Yeah. Colonel?
So I would agree wholeheartedly with our panelists here. However, I will tell you that there are some very unique situations. I think our nation's been in continuous conflict for the past 15 years, much longer than any other previous engagements that we've experienced. And I'll tell you from a personal perspective and being the garrison commander, some of the things that we're coming to grips with were the challenges associated really about the extreme unemployment that was happening to our veterans come about the 2005 up to 2012. And the Chief of Staff of the Army has responded to some of those concerns by instituting some initiatives called the Soldier for Life Transition Assistance Program, for instance, which is very much focused in on targeting that problem associated to this generation of veterans when they're trying to make these important transitions back into the civilian community, particularly as it pertains to employment, but it's also those other services that are out there, both VA as well as other services within local communities.
Mr. Ho.
So I enlisted in July of 2001, so most of my experience has only been with post 9/11. But the one thing that stands out is, looking out across the crowd today, there's a couple Vietnam veterans that I know of, and probably a few more. Just knowing that, what they've gone through and kind of the path that they've blazed, I think what we see now more than anything else is, you look at the diversity of the crowd here, the resources they bring, that's really what stands out. Is the support is there, but it's how do we put the soldier in touch with all these people out there right now who are trying to help them, but how do we get in touch with them and make that connection?
Mm-hmm. So before we go to our studio audience for questions to the panel, I'd just like to ask this question, and that is, do you think that there's this talk about around the country a military-civilian divide, that the two sides don't comprehend the experiences of the other, particularly civilians not comprehending the experiences of military people and veterans? Is that something that you all see here in Louisiana and elsewhere? You're shaking your head.
Yes. What the civilian population doesn't understand, we as military people, veterans and active duty alike, we have a loyalty to each other. We have an understanding. It doesn't matter what year you served, it doesn't matter when you served. We can meet military people and come right up on them. I met a gentleman in Texas at a restaurant. Hi, shipmate, how you doing? Don't know him from Adam, but we talk to each other. We give each other the greetings. We meet each other, and we know if you're a veteran, you served, it's a loyalty that we understand.
Is there a divide between, do civilians have a problem understanding and what can we do about that?
I think we do have a military divide, but I think there are common issues there. I mean, when you have soldiers that are deploying to an austere environment, they're going to come back changed. We do come back changed, and if we don't, then that's a problem within itself. But yes, of course there's a divide, and I think it's our responsibility to help educate our community and letting them know what we've experienced and how they can help us and how they can help us feel more comfortable in our community. With the National Guard, we are community members. We deploy, but we are part of our community, so we have some ownership there. And so we want to educate our community members. We want them to feel that we've been missed and that we are still part of that community, even though it might take a while for us to transition back.
Yeah. Anybody else want to get into that?
I don't. So my role is as employment coordinator for veterans in Louisiana. Mm-hmm. I don't see as much of a hard civilian-military divide. I see a lot of just typical career transition problems, right? So whether you're a doctor who wants to be a lawyer, a policeman who wants to be a dentist, you're going to kind of go through that same transition period. I think it's easy to say, well, military to civilian, that's a hard distinction. There's a divide there. What I usually tell my soldiers as they try to transition to civilian work is, you might be a tank commander, but really I don't see you as any different than a doctor, right? So a doctor, if he's trying to make that transition, it's the same, it's a doctor, non-doctor divide, right? So I think, generally civilian populations are very supportive, but it's how do you kind of frame it as a career transition versus a military is one side and all of a sudden you're on this other side and it's civilian world and that's very scary and very different, when really it hasn't been. That has been my experience, that it's really all that different.
Okay. So let's go to some of some questions from our guests in our studio, and if you'll not only ask your question but introduce yourself so that our panelists know who you are. And I'd like to go first to Brian, who's got a question.
Good evening. Brian Allen with Team RWB out of Baton Rouge. My question is, there's a lot of reactive stuff going on when the guys are coming out. We're transitioning, and we know we're transitioning. What are we going to do about being proactive, letting organizations onto and talking to these soldiers way before they even begin to get out? Because the one thing we know about the military is that we're going to get out eventually, and we need to know what resources are available to us well in advance of getting out, and what's local to our area as well.
So I can talk to this from an active duty perspective and some of the initiatives that I mentioned before, particularly the Soldier for Life Transition Assistance. It's an initiative that the Chief of Staff of the Army has pushed 2 chiefs ago, and it's actually gaining tremendous momentum. I'm very proud to be the Garrison Commander at Fort Polk because I think our transition assistance program is actually leading the way. We have about a 90% awareness of transition assistance at Fort Polk. What that means in real terms is what we try to do is connect with our veterans 18 months prior to their ETS. And if they're retiring, we want to connect with them 24 months ahead. And we give them very focused training for transition, both VA benefits, but then also really to try and give them the skills necessary to make the civilian transition in employment. And we bring quite a few employers actually to the installation through job fairs or even career days to where companies can actually come in and actually do one-on-one interviews with our soldiers through this period. So there's actually a lot of headway that's being done. And some of the things that we're also trying to tap into, particularly as it pertains to Louisiana, is we're trying to get our HRC to help us identify those transitioning soldiers that want to return to Louisiana that are at other installations. So I can reach out with my transition assistance program manager to connect with those individuals well ahead of their ETS or their retirement to actually get them then connected to the employers that are coming to our installation here in Louisiana that are offering those important jobs.
Before I go to another question, Brian, just tell us what Team Red, White, and Blue does.
So, thank you. Team RWB, Red, White, Blue, is an organization where we actually enrich the lives of veterans through social and physical interaction. What we do is we find veterans as well as civilians, and we do activities, talking to these people, trying to get them out for physical activity, for socials, for family events. It's really a close-knit family. Is RWB. We're well over 110,000 across the globe. I think we've got 4,000 in Louisiana right now currently. So,
thank you. That's wonderful. Corey, you had a question?
Absolutely. My name is Corey Levier. I was in the Army, deployed a few times, and my trip back home was interesting because being from Louisiana, it was a very unique feeling to come back home and feel like, and I'm going to speak to the divide, feel like the values that you learned or you experienced in the military, that camaraderie that you experienced, didn't exist in the civilian world. And a lot of veterans felt that way. They felt like being employed by an employer who didn't share the same values as you didn't work out. And a lot of times in the military, for instance, one guy worked security. He came and he tried to get a security job, but his supervisor at the security job could not understand his depth. In other words, he wanted to secure the entire, do everything the right way, the way he's been taught. The other guy wanted to take shortcuts. It didn't work out. He lost his job, but now his family's struggling. So when I got back, I had an opportunity to meet a guy named Matthew Courtney, who runs Louisiana Shooters Unlimited. And we used the GI Bill program to pay to become NRA certified instructors. And it alleviated the problem of becoming employed by someone. So instead of becoming an employee, we become entrepreneurs. And I think that the more veterans that we can get to become entrepreneurs, the more impact we can have on our country economically, socially, mentally, and in a lot of other ways. I was one of the first members of this program, and now I'm an NRA instructor. I teach people the class, and I have to tell you, coming from an instructor, being an instructor to civilians and teaching them rather than working for them has helped out a lot of veterans, man. And we have an entire training team, and we're growing in leaps and bounds. So it was a great opportunity, but a lot of times the divide mostly is mental and values.
Yeah, so some of the things that are the initiatives that we have in place now, and they're actually growing exponentially at Fort Polk and then other installations, is we're partnering with industry such as Cheniere and Bechtel, where their team actually reached out to us, and it was a team of veterans within Cheniere and Bechtel that understood the importance and the value of our military service members and what they actually could offer up, to their organization now as we're making these transitions. And they put together a special skills program where we hand select individuals who want to go into this special skills program. It's a welding program, very focused. And I'll tell you just from the success of it, 16 of 16 graduates from the welding program. They're going into advanced welding program where Cheniere is actually now paying them. And then after they get that advanced welding, then they actually are going to go to the job site. So what that's doing is stimulating other companies. We have KBR, CBI, as well as Next Ops coming on board. And as far as the entrepreneurial skills, we actually have a program within our transition assistance that actually focuses in on how to develop those skills with our veterans as they're also transitioning out.
Absolutely.
Let me just go. I want to go to Kevin right behind you, Corey, because you're doing a lot of the work that Corey's talking about, right?
Certainly, and within the Farm Bill, the last 2014 Farm Bill, Congress put in some provisions for those veterans that wanted to come back and integrate into agriculture. You know, a large pool of military actually come from rural America. Maybe not all off the farm, but they come from rural communities. And they come back and they might want to begin to farm and do those kinds of things. So, you know, they've got some incentives. And for our agency, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, you know, we have some cost share associated with establishing them in some agricultural production activities. Our big challenge was connecting. We're very good at communicating inside the agriculture community, but when you're trying to reach to veterans that are not from the farm and not in that community, reaching into those into that service and exposing that was difficult. So we partnered with the Louisiana Armed Forces Foundation, Jay and his group, and they've done some surveys and they began to hold some workshops, and actually we're beginning to interact as you saw in the video. We're starting to begin to work with veterans that actually want to explore agriculture, self-employment, you know, and they schedule themselves. They're in charge of their own operation, and we're beginning to work with them and provide some incentives and some support as they look into agriculture as an opportunity.
Before I ask the panel to respond to that, I'd like, Jay, could you talk a little bit about, as Kevin referred to, tell them what you're doing?
Correct. My name is Jay Townsend. I'm with the Louisiana Armed Forces Foundation. I served 9 years as an infantry, and you know, I'm a 100% disabled veteran. And when you talk about the divide, I think there is a divide between categories of veterans. Like you said, there's great programs for those that enter and excel in what they're doing and come out and go work for KBR or corporate America and are proud of it. Those aren't the ones that are utilizing many of our programs here today. And talking to Kevin, like I said, our guys were with Homegrown by Heroes, looking at agriculture, looking at opportunities to provide a purpose, direction, incentives for people. And just recently with the transition, our Soldier for Life, we're at Fort Polk, and they have welcomed us, the transition class, and said, hey, we'd love for y'all to come and speak to the soldiers. There's a lot of guys that are just want to know what's out there and how could we help financially get them established and what cost share programs, and also groups with Dylan over here, you know, building his organization in New Orleans and what we're going to be doing with agriculture. I'd like to incorporate that.
I want to go to Dylan, but these guys have laid a lot on the table here. Somebody might want to unpack a little bit of that before we go to Dylan.
So I want to go to what Corey was saying before. The scenario you described of, you know, here's a guy who's done this level of security work on active duty, and now he's stuck working with this manager who's trying to cut corners, right? I think, you know, going through the service, you know exactly where your chain of command is, right? And a lot of what I see is these veterans are frustrated because I know better than my boss, but I also know that I'm not supposed to tell him that. Right. So what do I do in that case? Exactly. We know that you can go to your first sergeant. We know you can go to your company commander. A lot of veterans don't know this is the only guy I've ever dealt with who is the company commander of that level.
And they recede into a shell almost.
Right, and you described it very well. You know, from what you said, it absolutely makes sense. That veteran is underutilized. He should be doing something more than what he's currently doing. Right. But what I see a lot of is, you know, the vet doesn't know what to do with that. Right. He can't put in the words that you already did. Right. So then this is frustration of I'll talk to my friend Corey, which doesn't really solve the actual employment.
That's why we
concern.
started Veteran Peer Support. Mr. Schultz and Tyler here, we do a roundtable discussion and we talk about everything.
Exactly.
You know, jobs, family, emotions, because we have to address those issues, because you can send a veteran out who has great skills, but if he's emotionally damaged, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Captain, you want to talk about that?
I think this is a good point, and I also wanted to to share that, sometimes I think our veterans have some expectations that are a little bit too high, because, you can have a soldier or a veteran that has done 2 or 3 deployments, and he was important. He was important. His job was important. He knew exactly what was expected of him. And then he comes back into the civilian sector, and because he excelled so much in that particular environment, maybe expecting to be at that administrative level already. So that's just like asking a civilian, from a corporate manager position to say, oh, well, I have all this managerial experience, I'm going to be a lieutenant colonel when I get into the National Guard. Well, I think for our veterans, I think we also need to have them prepared that, okay, you have these great set of skills, and there's a whole lot more in that resume. I think somebody mentioned that about the resume, that our soldiers, our veterans don't even know how much they have to put on that resume. They've got a lot more skills sometimes because of their humility they don't put on there. And so I like to help them to just kind of to dive a little. Yeah, you've got a whole lot more skills to offer that civilian sector than you think, but also having realistic expectations that you may have to start a little bit lower to get yourself up there, just like you did when you enlisted.
Absolutely. Dylan?
Well, yes, there's a military-civilian divide, and what your viewers need to know out there is that there are excellent organizations in Louisiana that are bridging it, and all you have to do is zoom in on this logo right here. Team Red, White, and Blue incorporates civilians into their activities. The Mission Continues is another great organization that, again, recruits civilians to participate with military and veterans. My organization in New Orleans, called Bastion Community of Resilience, we are breaking ground next month on an intentionally designed neighborhood for warriors and families with lifelong rehabilitative needs. And yes, we'll be renting to veterans, but we're also reserving some of the housing inventory for regular civilians who may be retired, but who will volunteer 6 hours of service each week to mentor the veteran or provide respite for the caregiver, tutor little Johnny after school. So that's how we're bridging the divide. And it's doing a lot of things. It's bridging the divide. It's recreating that military family, and we talked about the loss of that military family. But hands down, if you ask me, the number one way to optimize reintegration and reduce symptoms of PTSD is peer support, is social support. And there's a lot of great programs that are doing that in Louisiana, and I'm proud to be one of them.
I want to talk about I think when we think about veterans, we often think about men, right? We think about when you say soldier, or you think of a man, but that's not the case. Are there issues that women veterans are facing that are different from the men that we're not addressing? Is that part of the divide as well?
I'm Tanya Whitney with Women Veterans of Louisiana, and your point is right, is dead on. We went from a position of being 50 years ago limited to 2% of the force and not being real veterans, when we got off active duty, to being 25% or more of the force and earning combat badges along with our brothers on the front line. And I mean, even as recently as this past weekend, my husband and I were at a veterans event, and one of the male veterans started talking to him about his deployment, and my husband, being the person that he is, and saying, I'm not the wounded warrior, she is, so talk to her, But yes, there is still that divide there, even, within the veteran community. And typically it's easier to identify a male veteran just because they wear a hat or shirt. Women veterans are not as well defined. We don't have the military haircut. We don't dress like veterans for the most part. So it is very, very tough for us to be recognized appropriately, as veterans. But I think there's still a lot of social impact also in that society still does not recognize women as being in combat. My deployments, I was stationed at a base where, it was affectionately called Mortaritaville because we were being mortared every day, sometimes all day, all night, and if you're hiding in a bunker, with full gear on, and you don't call that combat, there's something wrong. Yeah, I wasn't firing a gun, and somebody wasn't firing at me, but it's no different. And
so how do we deal with the particular problems that she's talking about, that divide of integrating women back into civilian life?
Saying there should be no difference between the male and female counterparts.
But is there?
There is to the employers, but to what I do, there is no difference. We apply the same benefits to veterans, both male and female, and it has no bearing on who they are or what sex they are. The bearing is, let's talk about your medical conditions and let's see what kind of claims we can file for you. And I think that any accredited counselor, not just LDVA, any accredited counselor throughout the state of Louisiana is doing a real good job at filing claims for veterans, both male and female. I believe we're encompassing what we need for our female veterans as well as our male veterans, and it is working as far as what we do.
Well, what about integrating them back into civilian life? How is that different? What are the particular challenges there, Mr. Hope?
So, from the job's perspective, I think women generally, across the board, have a more difficult time. I work with a lot of civilian HR type people, a lot of recruiters, and I think that's a challenge that they're dealing with also. So I don't know that I have any answers. I mean, I definitely see it and empathize with it. I don't know that I have any easy solutions because I think everybody's still trying to figure that out.
Byron, I want you to talk about we were joking earlier, you're in your third retirement. You're dealing with the cohort that you deal with are maybe older veterans, but they're younger veterans. And what can we do to bring those guys in, or those men and women into that fraternity and bring them into the kind of services that your particular organization is able to offer?
Veterans are having a hard time, and we here in broad daylight with our uniform on, finding service organizations, not just to include the American Legion. You have the DAV, you have the Military Order of the Purple Heart, you have VFW, Veterans of Foreign War, AMVETS, and I can go on with all these different organizations. But veterans are having a hard time finding them. So we have to get out. We have to get more and more and more prevalent and visual, so veterans can find us. Because this is where you find out where the benefits are, or who to send you to for the benefits. Because I have a question for Al, and it's very important for veterans to know this. Number one, they trying to file their own claims themselves. Don't do it. Let Louisiana Department of Veterans Affairs or DAV do it for you. You're going to mess up and do something wrong, forget to sign a block or something, and it takes a year longer for that veteran to get the claim in for the benefits, and then it puts a strain and a stress on the individual's everyday life. He can't feed his family because of the disability that that veteran has. How can we shorten the time after the claim gets in? How can we shorten that time so it doesn't take 3, 4, 5 years for the veteran to get the benefits that is duly needed for him? For instance, the one individual who just received the Military Order of the Purple Heart after 62 years.
Al?
The answer to that is our counselors take their time, go through the process, they tell the veteran what they'll need. As long as it takes the veteran to bring those documents into our offices so we can file the claims, submit those claims. I have a counselor right now out in the state who is averaging 16 days when he takes the claim, puts it in the mail to the VA processes the claim, and the veteran gets the letter back in his hand saying what he's got, he's averaging 16 days because he has the veteran do the legwork. We can't do the legwork for everybody. He gets the documents, puts it all together in a package, submits it, and when that package goes in, it's complete. It's what's called a fully developed claim. It can take long, it can be short, but the stress of all of this is the veteran doing the legwork to get the documents, to put in the package for the counselor to send off. And again, I mentioned LDVA has a good group of people doing this. DAV has a good group of people doing this. MOPH, look, there's a whole host of people out in the state who are doing this, but claims for benefits should go through an accredited counselor. An accredited counselor knows how to put a package together and get it for the veteran. On average, 90 days is not unheard of to get a claim back. In the same token, it's not unheard of for somebody who submits their own claim to take 3 to 5 years to get a claim back.
I can speak to that from personal experience. Mine was a short time. I had a friend of mine deployed, same unit, reintegration process was the same. His took 2 years because he did not follow through. You have to follow through. With the simplest things, you have to follow through. And it's about attention to detail and making sure you have, like he mentioned, good support. And I just had a question. I know I'm cutting off into everybody, but I apologize. Unity. How can we show a good unified visual for our state to where all of these organizations have a way to work together to reach even more veterans in the smaller communities and actually get out there and get hands-on? It doesn't matter if it's a bus that goes on a tour around the state, but we have to find a way to unify, and not just unify visually, just like this, but I would like to see some more like this happen in the future. How do we do that?
Most of your state agencies, like Louisiana Department of Veteran Affairs, has a press secretary that has an outreach that goes an email blast or a blast out to a variety of places out in the state. Locations, organizations, individuals. That's how we do it. We need for everybody to contact LDVA. Get with the press secretary. Give them your information. We're looking for that information to be able to blast it out statewide to all the people that we have on our email list. If you want to get on that email list, please talk to the press secretary. As many people as we can get on there is what we're looking for. Blue Star Mom, Gold Star Mom, Women Veterans is already on it.
Yeah. Speaking of Blue Star Moms, Donna, we've not heard from you tonight.
I guess, we're concerned about our children whenever they come back, transition in employment. Their peers have gone through different experiences while they've been overseas or serving in the military. And then they come back and socialization, they're not on the same level. Education, they're looking, to go back to school, and they're 25 going back with 18-year-olds. And I guess the most important thing, as far as us mothers, is we would like a grateful nation to acknowledge and honor the sacrifices they have made.
Okay. Anybody want to?
I think I'm probably the closest to actually having transitioned from active to civilian. Going back to what Byron said, I think, we find those local veteran service organizations. This going to be different. I mean, looking out across the crowd now, everybody's in a different organization. So I don't know what's best in Shreveport versus Monroe. I know from New Orleans, I'm looking out across the crowd, and there's 2 other VFW post members here. I've got Dylan and I've got Landon. And everything you've said, how do you kind of get back into the world about, how do you know about education? How do you know about filing your claims? Within the VFW post in New Orleans, I can think off the top of my head, there's a handful of female veterans, right? And like you said, walking across, walking down the street, you're not going to recognize other female veterans based on their hat, a lapel pin, or whatever they have. I think ideally we want the New Orleans VFW to have more women veterans so that we can't just name off the 5 or 6 that we have, right? But it is, getting involved in that local organization. It's going to be something different for every town and city, but that resource is there.
Captain, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, my heart goes out to you because I know it's got to be difficult. I'm a mother myself, and to kind of add on to Miss Tanya, being a woman veteran, we do have specific challenges, but also as a mother, watching your son or your daughter go off to combat and having that worry if they're going to come back okay, and then when they do come back, knowing that they're maybe not okay, and you don't know how to help them. So I'm so happy that we're doing this. This program right here is also bridging the gap between our civilian sector and the military. Just to comment a little bit about the women veterans, I can tell for me, because we're such a minority, I've received so much support. We're mothers, we're daughters, so there's a special, extra special connection there, aside from our brothers in arms also, because we share special challenges, some as a mother, missing our families and our children. So my hat's off to you, a salute to you, being here and representing our women veterans, because we do have unique challenges also. But I'm just happy and proud to be a part of this entire veteran family. So I appreciate you having me here today.
Thank you all for participating tonight, and to all our people in the audience here to being part of this very good discussion. So we've run out of time for our question and answer segment, and we'd like to thank our panelists, Mr. Leger, Captain Huval, Colonel Athey, and Mr. Ho for their insights on this month's topic. When we come back, we'll have a few closing comments.
What a wonderful conversation, and I'm astounded there are so many services available, and I fear that everybody doesn't know about them.
It's true, and I think this is a great program that I think makes people understand that there is a lot out there for them if they just can find it. There's help.
Right. Well, there's a start on it.
Yep.
Probably a lot more conversations, and I have to tell you, I was watching one of our participants grunt, our wonderful dog, who was just fabulous.
We never got a question from Grunt.
Never got a question, but
we got a comment, but not a question.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We encourage you to visit our website at lpb.org/Public Square. And while you're there, check out our list of resources for veterans returning home and comment on tonight's show. We'd love to hear from you.
We would indeed like to hear from everyone on this topic, and we're going to have a repeat one for next month, and it involves a very controversial topic. Plans, to remove 4 Confederate monuments from New Orleans have been postponed by a federal court. 2 attempts to block the statues' removal failed in the legislature. Yet a statewide poll shows 73% of residents oppose moving the structures. And next month, the Louisiana Public Square will explore that debate in an encore presentation of its award-winning episode, Symbol or Statement, History in Public Spaces. And we thank you for watching this evening. Good night.
And to all the veterans here in our viewing audience, thanks for your service. Good night, everyone.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.
Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.